Thank you, Zach, and thanks to all of you for being here. I know a number of you, and Brian and I and Daniel, who you'll hear more about, really appreciate you and your work and taking time to be here and sharing the results of what you've accomplished. I can't think of how many meetings like this I've been to, but I would tell you that the first meeting of U.S. Green Building Council was a lot smaller than this. And so take heart and keep up the good work, and let's change the world in time for our grandchildren to be successful. I want to share an observation before we really begin, and that is, in my own case, as some of you know, I've spent half a century of my professional career as an architect trying to take carbon out of the built environment by design. And we've had, as you know, some success, but the truth is the existential threat has grown during that time. And so it's caused me to do a reshift of my own thinking. And I realized we had released so much carbon before we started trying to reduce the amount of carbon. There was so much in the atmosphere already that's a huge part of the problem. And so sequestration became a much bigger item in my agenda than it ever had been. And the Foundation for Regeneration that Brian and I co-founded is focusing on that and focusing on trying to create models and financial plans and strategies that will be change making and will accelerate the number of people in this room and on this campus and on our planet that are working on this as their primary goal, and accelerate positive outcomes. And so the title that was chosen, the tip of the spear for local climate change, what does it look like? And my description, you're going to hear a different one. And my description looks a lot like Brian and Daniel. And I think it needs to look like all of us. What will be shared this morning is, we want to be clear, not worked out. Unlike the LEED rating system and other things you have seen me invest time and energy in, we are designing this airplane as we taxi down the runway. And we're probably going to take off before it's fully outfitted. And it's an open source collaborative initiative. So we are requiring on your input to make the changes needed to take off with success. And the additional changes that will be needed to fly it as high and far as it needs to go to make the changes that will make human life successful long-term on this planet. So please give us your feedback today. We're sharing work in progress, and we will continue to share with you, and let's grow this family and make the difference that's required. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Feinberg.
Everybody hear me? Do I have to go to the podium?
Use the podium so that.
Oh,
Yeah.
people can hear.
okay, well, I'll do that. So before we get into the kind of what we've been working on, we want to kind of open it up and hear more about what all of you are working on, because this question isn't, it's a very subjective question. What does the tip of the spear for the local climate action look like? Well, I'm sure that tip is very different for every single one of us. And so interestingly, that we're in the heartland, and for some reason, sometimes I put things in my pockets. I've got these like little mementos. And the one that I picked up on my way here was this silver dollar that my grandmother gave me, and she's since passed on. But on the back is the moonshot. It's the landing on the moon, and it has Dwight D. Eisenhower on it. And what did he say about the heartland? He's from around here. Whatever America hopes to bring to pass in the world must first come to pass in the heart of America. So that's a lot of pressure on the Midwest Climate Collaborative. I mean, if we're going to do something on climate change, we got to really understand that we might be the tip of the spear for the whole country. And I've had the opportunity to live on both coasts, and I can tell you that there is a unique spirit in the people here, and there is a unique enabling environment that has less of the noise and more of the good-hearted people that want to make a difference. So what we have to do is actually, the systemic mitigation that we need requires combined efforts of government, private sector, and philanthropy to coordinate better across multiple organizations on more tasks than they ever had to before. I mean, we're doing something like a MnSHA. And so before we get into sharing our subjective ideas of what we think is the tip of the spear, we wanted to open up. I'll use this as a talking piece. We'll go around a little bit. If you guys have answers to questions, you can also say pass. I don't have anything right now. But if you have something to say, 30 seconds to a minute. We want to open up. This is not a conversation where we're talking at you. This is a discussion among us all. And the idea, like Bob was saying, is that we can break what we're doing. We can make it better and upgrade it together. You can find out how it applies to what you're doing, or maybe you have something that can easily integrate with things that we're doing. So you're lucky to be so close to me. I apologize in advance. You can pass.
Be the first one to pass, but no, I'm just kidding.
30 seconds to a minute. So
Okay.
just tip of the spear. Where do you think the real action lies? What do you feel is like the most tangible in your worldview or in your?
Well, I think connection and community, and really focusing on, I guess, making real connections across sectors. And I think that's really important. And I think it's happening, the conversation's happening more and more, right? That we know we need to, it's not just climate, it's also social justice. It's also, there's a lot of issues that kind of fall together. And if we can truly tackle that in a way that like helps to resolve multiple problems and ills, I think we're in the right direction.
We do like a uh-oh or like a clicking your fingers, just acknowledge. Thank you. You can say your name too if you.
Okay.
I know who's talking.
Wanda.
Wanda.
Eileen Grassley. I just want to add to that, I think consistent messaging, on things that we would like to change, it makes it easier to happen. If we can make it as easy as possible to create the change, I think we will, get some flow or more flow. I should say.
Good morning, my name is Kelly Kranick. I am a high school social studies teacher.
Sorry.
Okay, my phone was like, whoa, okay. What's the sign? And I'm also a PhD student studying educational leadership and sustainability. And so my personal opinion, or the angle I'm taking, is that I think the heart of most communities are their schools. And that's the space and place where you bring different generations together. And so my big question is like, why are schools not integrating sustainability and climate change in their curriculum, in their facilities, and in their culture?
So I'm Deb. I am from Clayton, just a stone's throw away. I'm retired. I'm a volunteer chairing our sustainable action committee for the city. I'm convinced that we are in the urgent and important quadrant that we all know where we ought to be spending our time. So I'm most concerned with engagement, that we bring others along from all the different spheres. So education, corporate, big nonprofits, get them all on board.
I'm Bill Brown from Indiana University, and for the past 5 weeks, I've been working on something called the Indiana Resilience Funding Hub. And that grew out of a survey by one of our faculty who surveyed 1,000 communities and asked what is stopping you from doing more about climate change. And the two top answers were money and staffing. And so the Indiana Resilience Funding Network is designed to help them with both of those things by allowing them the resources to apply for the grant money that's flowing through the system in the billions and billions of dollars. But the people who need that money the most don't have the staffing or the time or the expertise to fill out those grant application forms. So we are hiring a grant specialist, and we'll have 4 of our McKinney Climate Fellows assisting those communities to fill out those proposals.
My name is Krista Durlis, and I'm faculty at Maryville University, teaching about business and sustainability. I'm also a student there studying data science. And I have a long career in environmental management, working both on the policy side, like convening business stakeholders for change, and working inside companies from startups to Fortune 50s for helping them change. And I'm hoping to get back into that full-time in fall. And I'm most concerned, obviously, with the business side and to there's a lot of talk about ESG and how it's co-opting the message and how it's just gonna wreck everything, but taking the other handle of the vessel and saying, no, this is like our chance to, turn that ship for real this time, and so I'm ready to take that on, either in like a broader sense or inside.
My name is Joe Cunningham. I'm a student at Maryville University. For me, it's all about engaging people and engaging stakeholders. And for me, that means students. And so how can we create activities or educational opportunities for students and even like faculty and staff to get involved in these environmental and sustainable topics?
I'm Emily, and I'm with the Missouri Gateway Green Building Council, and if you know me, you probably know what I'm gonna say. Buildings are climate solutions. We all live, work, learn in buildings. 90% of our time, typically for Americans, is spent indoors. So we have a real opportunity to make them better and really make them net positive. Let's stop talking net zero, start talking net positive. And Kelly, I have a Green Schools program for you. If you're not already familiar with it, you should go to the Green Schools session.
Love that. If you hear, the bat signals for people, oh, I need that connection. We're all contributing to each other. So I like that. Thank you. And
I'm Sarah from the University of Chicago, and I mean, taking the question literally, I think that the tip of the spear is individuals just personally changing their values and changing how they live their life. It's not going to do everything. It's very individualized, and obviously the rest of the spear is whatever they've got. They have, design measures, engineering measures, policy measures, but what you can do as an individual and just work on the ground, right? I think that's what's it.
My name is Jason Wagers. I'm a sustainability student at Maryville University. It's my last semester. So my second career, I guess I think engagement is really important. I believe education too, especially getting the kids nowadays, the younger generation to see they're taking this stuff a lot more seriously, and they're going to be our future consumers. So I think we really start educating the children and young adults, because they're going to be the ones going to college, they're going to be the ones that are policymakers in the future. And hopefully we can kind of get them engaged, get them active or activated, and really let the youth come in the summer here and take the reins and move this forward.
10 points for Charter Indiana. I'm going to follow up with that comment. Just to be real specific, I'm a big fan of Michigan City Sustainability Commission. Passed by ordinance, 13 seats, 2 of them are middle school kids, and 2 of them are high school kids. I think that's a very effective mechanism for a city to stay on task with local climate action, no matter who ends up with mayor.
I think that distributed generation is really important. The funding is ready, like point the spear in the right direction, and this is anti-poverty, it's decarbonizing. It could even be equitable, and it puts a hole in the side of investor-owned utilities who will stop this movement every chance they can.
Good morning, I am Mary Thompson from the Village of Belleville, Illinois, and the new education on early childhood up to 4th grade and higher learning students to get engaged in climate action planning. it's important that we attain this information and teach that generation on how to do better than what we did to preserve the earth. And so that's why it's important that we have the conversation in a transparent way to be inclusive, because we're talking about humanity. It has nothing to do with nothing else but humanity.
Good morning, I'm Ronnie. I'm a landscape architect, and I agree with 100% of what's been said, and I think there's so many factors that play a role in this, but in my personal practice, I feel like policy, funding, and understanding. Our clients don't understand the value and benefits of making more sustainable decisions, or there isn't a policy to come to that requires them to do so, or there's funding available to help them follow through with that policy. All of those things really need to go together.
Morning, I'm Scott. We need less private consumption and more public goods.
My name is Kristen Beverly, the program manager of the county. And I'm a property manager college and affordable housing. And I say the best way to educate our people who be able to understand them. And that's the way that we'll be able to connect with people and
Everybody, I'm Jordan Oster from the Iowa Environmental Council. And in my recent work, we've been working with cities to pass resolutions committing to 24/7 carbon-free energy, community-wide goals to try to make sure we're running on 100% clean energy 100% of the time. There's 3 cities that have made that commitment in Iowa so far, but there's also a broader set of cities that are undertaking climate planning, cities that are doing benchmarking, and I really see local policies on the rise at a time when state policy isn't necessarily pushing us forward.
I'm Mari Oviedo from Fresh Energy or Clean Energy at Senior Public Basins in Minnesota. We work mostly on policy, so the first thing that came to my mind thinking this question was collaborating with state agencies and really understanding the limitations that they have, and making that transparent and accessible to the community. I think I'm kind of visualizing like removing the curtain or like the veil of like how government entities work and really making sure people understand that where they want to play in and giving them that choice of how you really want to and not saying that what's the best solution for your community. So just understanding kind of the importance of there's government.
Morning, everyone. I'm Melvin Mawson. I'm with the Delta Institute in Chicago, and a lot of great things have been said here. Not going to reinvent the wheel, so I'll be brief, but I really think it's important that we bring capacity funding to the community.
I'm Therese. I'm with Indiana University. I feel like environmental. And my big priority would be helping local government leapfrog over the planning phase and the paralysis by analysis and get to make implementation, particularly on buildings where there are so many known improvements, which we need to keep chatting about that.
Mark Bouchard chose the same right now development partnership and lots of great comments made.
Freddie Grant, and I just want to, what you were saying, and that really starting from the individual to the community, but ensuring that those communities have direct say in people who are organizing us and are able to make the policy and take the action. Liz Werner, I'm a sustainability specialist for the City of Juniper Falls, and I recently transition from the nonprofit space, so thinking about bridging those different entities, but really, the two words that I've been thinking about are creativity and solutions, and how we can really be creative in the way that we're addressing climate, and that there are solutions that are out there and we can implement them. I think actually give us a lot of hope and optimism that we can do this if we work together.
Sandy here, I'm with the Resilient Activists. And I have two comments. The first is we focus heavily on supporting the emotional well-being of climate activists. Because we need y'all. We need you not getting burnout, we need you not being depressed and not being suicidal. And like it's really difficult. And so any tipping point has to include emotional well-being, not just for activists, but for those who just impacted by the weather events and so on. The second point is, to your point, the tipping point will come when everyday people do get it and they live from that deep connection to nature. There, believe it or not, I've learned there are human beings that are shareholders in companies and human beings that actually are like in the legislature. Make sure you know, and it's like, so we actually teach classes in that and how to put it with a 5-step deal that to really help the general public, you know, for church groups and things like that, just to take their understanding to the next level and know implement.
I'm Kim Morrow, I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm really excited about action on the local level. You know, for a long time, we thought, like maybe 10 years ago or so, we thought significant climate action can come from federal legislation, state level, and I think we all realize that the local sphere is really where things are moving. And I'm, now that I'm in this position, I'm feeling the room to make action, and especially across sectors.
My name is Paula from Evanston, Illinois, retired mechanical engineer from the energy business, now volunteering climate issues, and my biggest concern is how do we scale up all of these efforts that are happening at individual levels, local levels, because we need an exponential sort of turbocharging to get things up to a commercial level where we can meet these goals that we have for 2030, 2050, and right now it's just not getting back, you know, and we really need policy, we need funding, and understanding at the policy generation level to make some really hard choices and that's an example.
So my name is Kate Bexell, and I'm an ambassador for the American Conservation Coalition. And so I think that there are really two things that need to be happening in order to sort of combat climate change. And so the first one that our organization tries to focus on is educating youth and engaging our citizens. And so we do a lot of that by actually working with students on campuses, in schools, and from my perspective as a student, a lot of students do care about climate change, but they don't really know a whole lot about it or how they can actually make a difference in their own individual lives. And they don't understand all the ways that it does directly impact them. So we do a lot of work to try to make fighting climate change cool to younger generations. And then also I really believe that holding open conversations with all sorts of different people and engaging in more collaborations is really key. And so our organization is specifically trying to bridge that gap between political parties. And I actually have two examples for why this is important. So not related to the ACC, but back in October, I was able to sit in on a panel at my university. And so they had the Missouri Farm Bureau and the Environmental Defense Fund there. They thought they were coming from completely different sides of the aisle. And they ended up realizing that they both had programs that were doing almost the exact same thing to help out Missouri farmers. And they had never actually been seated at the same place to just talk about that before. And then also, usually whenever we're trying to engage Republican legislators, we are told that we are the only environmental group that has ever actually reached out to them. And so people on the right are actually in favor of conservation and trying to make a change, but we need to have those conversations in order to make any progress.
Morning, everyone. My name is Amber. I'm the Livable City Solutions Manager at Caramita in Indianapolis. I believe that the answer is in the question. So the tip of the spear is localized climate action. I believe that cities are hubs for holistic solutions where we can think about livability and the quality of life for residents, and taking climate action is improving quality of life for residents.
All right, I got my coin back. I noticed that Zach hasn't gone, and Jacob, he's our amazing note taker. He's got some good stuff.
Yeah, I'm Jacob. I'm the note taker for the.
Sorry.
Good. I think that understanding that it's gonna be a mix between that while it's important for individuals to try to do what they can, it's going to take larger changes and trying to shift the narrative from somewhat individual action sometimes to a more widespread, like it's not going to be able to just be like one person. It's going to have to be organizations or large things that are consuming or causing maybe things with the climate to occur. Explain a little bit, but that's kind of what I mean. Transition from the individual to organizations and larger groups and thinking of change.
Thank you. I'm Zach. I'm the moderator for this event, and I'm a senior here at LSU. And this fall, I get to be a teaching assistant for a class for first year students about climate change. And what was really cool to me was how in our interactions and in our weekly sessions, it was cool to see how the students who are taking this class now seem to be so much more kind of impressive and interested in the issue and motivated to do things than even my peers 3 years ago. So I was just kind of shocked by that. And I think it's really cool that just in the last few years, even like just a small age difference makes a big difference. And so I just think that involving the youngest people and your younger students, even if it's just a small difference in age. And I'm a college student too, but those first year college students were super impressive to me.
All right, I think we got everybody.
When I left engineering to do climate full time, maybe 4 years ago, and the first thing I did was do a listening tour. So I spent an entire year interviewing about 300 people in Indiana working on environment. And many of those people just 3 years later are gone. They took jobs outside of Indiana. So I think a lot about knowledge management and succession planning, especially if the activists get burned out. Where does the knowledge go? Do people have to reinvent the wheel? So I think a lot about succession planning and knowledge management.
Well, I don't know if y'all do it, but I can feel the heart and the commitment in the room. Does anybody else feel it? And I'm so grateful for all the things that y'all are doing, and I don't know, we're a community of peers, and I hope that, this conversation continues, but now's our time to share our little 2 cents or $1, kind of where we're at on this. And, so we started does anybody here not live in the city? You don't live in the city? Outside the city? Okay. No, I'm just curious because, it's really easy to focus on climate, and we were thinking, let's go right into I'd say the fire where all this is happening. Like if it's gonna happen at all, it's cities where we'll see a calibrated society and ecology. It must first come to pass in cities if it's gonna happen at all, because there's 80% of humanity lives in the city, and that's where 70% of global CO2 emissions occur. So we're thinking, I spent a lot of time in a global stage and a national stage at the UN and things like that, but I was really excited about putting all that aside and going super hyper local. What's going on? I mean, we're really smart people in this room. We can do this. What's the bottleneck? And so some of these questions, I think there's a lot around the storytelling and the education and engagement that came up in the conversation, but we were thinking, when we started looking at the plans in our city, Kansas City, you know, we started talking to the community members and they were like, please, for the love of God, don't write another plan. I heard that. Let's move beyond that. So we took that to heart and we're just starting stuff. We're piloting and we're learning as we go, as Bob's saying. We're really at the, not the cutting edge, but the bleeding edge. And so it might get a little dirty, but we feel like at the end, it'll be helpful. So at the intersection of urban risk and climate mitigation, we really, there's a lot more questions you could ask, you know, it's endless, but how do we pay for it? Everybody talks about the federal funding, but it doesn't necessarily create leadership locally, regional leadership. It's a little bit of a money grab situation. Everyone's pushing each other, kind of like Black Friday Walmart, you know, that's the image I get. It's exciting, but that's not going to provide the leadership when we have sound, consistent, measurable progress towards carbon drawdown. And then the other thing is, how do we coordinate multiple workforces across entities? So like I said, we need more people and more types of organizations to work together on more tasks than they ever had before. So we might need a new operating system. We might need a, like Tiger Woods, we might need to break our swing in order to up-level our game a little bit in terms of local climate action. Trust is a big thing, you know, do you trust what we're doing? It could be, you know, everything, you know, there's carbon credit fraud, there's all kinds of stuff around claims and greenwashing. How do you build trust? You know, there's got to be some sort of ongoing reporting mechanisms, and how do we do that with an action-oriented way, where it's not just, okay, we know that slowly it's getting hotter and hotter, but how do we attach that to the outcomes that we're creating along the way? And then finally, well, what type of human culture and leadership is required of us to behave in such a way to achieve these milestones? And that might be the most important. Forget your name in the back in the red shirt. You said it's humans, right? We forget that we made this all up, all society, all the economic systems, and we can shift that if we're open enough. So this kind of keeps me up at night, and I wanted to share this. You know, everybody. I have a background in finance, and what this is the net present value analysis of the investments it will take for a building to become net positive or net zero from different perspectives in society, right? So you have the property owner, you have the citizens, the utilities, and the government. And what you will find is that one of the reasons why things are getting stuck is because it does not make financial sense from their perspective. So if you're that decision maker and you're looking at the profit and loss statement and the investments in your balance sheet from the perspective of a mayor or a city manager, you can only go so far in terms of to make those investments. And a lot of these climate action plans are essentially unfunded liabilities. They're a wish list of, oh man, we would love to do all these things. But again, who's going to fund that? Well, maybe we can get a little bit away in terms of the government grants, but we're kind of contorting ourselves to get that. And at the end of the day, have we created the community and the culture to make those milestones? So property owners, it doesn't make sense. Government doesn't make sense. Citizens, that's the only one. So it's up to us, ultimately. We, just like everything, you know, everybody gets the election, donate to me, I want to run a campaign. We're going to have to pay for it. And it, you know, maybe not poor people because they have their own challenges and we can work on that. Spent half of my career in poverty alleviation and microfinance, but there are people that can't afford it. And so the thing is that the benefits do not accrue evenly across different actors in society. So from that perspective, we can talk about this. I mean, I can send you articles and research on that, but that's a big aha moment for me. It's like, oh wait, it doesn't make sense for them to make that investment government. It doesn't make sense for them to make that investment property owner or business. That's why it's not, that's part of the reason why it's not. Now you have the amazing property owners and the business that are going above and beyond. There are a lot of exceptions to this. But this is the case of decarbonization from a country perspective in Slovenia. It was pretty, in Europe, pretty far ahead. Going back again. I think this is where the rubber meets the road for us. What we've been developing, the last 6 months to a year, it's essentially an outcome-based credit. And that, you know, what it is essentially a climate action marketplace. So our vision is to create an eco-credit methodology that educates, accelerates, and funds verified climate activities in cities. Now, this happens across 3 categories: reductions in emissions, carbon sequestration, and risk mitigation. Because, oh, by the way, you can sequester carbon and do nothing for risk. You can work on risk in the portfolios of all these banks and insurance companies and do nothing for emissions. It's like you kind of have to cover your bases. And I think that we're about to see a lot more rules out for the task force of financial related disclosures, the new national strategy for environmental economic accounting at the White House. We're changing the way environmental economics happen. And that's, I think, going to be a watershed moment in this country. But this is, so everybody's heard of carbon credits. Why don't carbon credits work in cities? There's 3 main reasons. And there is an exception to this, but I'd say the rule is that if you want to do a carbon credit, what you need is lots of land, like thousands of acres. And it needs to be managed in a homogeneous way. And that just doesn't work for the diversity of the city. So there's really, at the moment, no simple instrument that supports locally supported interventions tied to outcomes that people can buy where they live, work, and play. So Anheuser-Busch, I noticed that they're from here. If they want to go carbon neutral, where are they going to get their credits? They're going to buy it from East Asia or Africa. They're not buying credits from St. Louis. So what we're talking about is tying outcomes, outcome-based financing. So let's give an example. Heat Island. We understand Heat Island. We understand that the roads are hot. Okay, if we paint the road white or light gray, as Bob adjusted that, and let's say that we have some of the data to measure that temperature. Let's say it's in an urban, inner city community, environmental justice, they're a poor community where they're more likely to have hospitalization over heat stroke. So hospital bills are going up. We can paint it white and we can show that it was 120 degrees before we did that and 90 degrees consistently after we did that. That would be, that cost would be the value of an outcome-based credit. That's an example. Another example is like a solar finance. Let's say that it's a nonprofit or a school. Somebody said, schools is where we need to be. Well, that school maybe not be able to make that investment on its own, right? But if we calculate the emissions and we have that data stream, so data is the foundation of this, the before and after. There's a company in town who wants to do something good, and if we can redirect that money from Europe or Asia back to our local environments, then we're actually mitigating where we learn, work, and play. And guess what? Our eco-anxiety goes down a little bit, maybe. So this is the concept. If, let's say that solar deal didn't make any sense to do that deal, you're not credit worthy, blah, blah, blah. But the eco credits could reduce the risk for that funder just enough to make that deal happen. So maybe more solar deals will happen around town. Keep going the wrong way. So there's a different, part of it is supply. There's no supply. Creating a system where there is local supply of these outcomes, something that works for cities. So we've developed this, what we call the Urban Ecosystem Standard. I have a copy of it front. It's completely open source. We're not guarding it with IP or anything like that. It's a Google Doc. This is literally, our draft is version 0.3. So we're early, but we're committed to seeing this through on a couple pilot projects in Kansas City all the way. And we believe that we can broker deals with local companies to buy those credits. And if they want to claim carbon neutral, we can make that happen by using a basket of, adding and buying carbon credits ourselves to make it, whatever claim they want to do, we can help make that happen. But the idea is, as much as possible, it's not a perfect marketplace, but over time, that money is 100% locally spent. And that's really one of the goals that we're trying to do. So delivering on local supply, and then, like I said, working on the demand from the private institutions. So they're really focused, these companies are focused on carbon neutrality, even though it's kind of tunnel vision. We say, come for the carbon, stay for the ecosystem. They're interested in scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, but they're all trying to figure out. Typically, they have a carbon broker, and they're buying from these places I mentioned. Public institutions, they're required to do all this ongoing reporting, but reporting won't get us there. We need the outcomes. And so because our data would be verified by a third party, and obviously there's a lot of things that I'm not sharing in terms of how the governance body would work and how the scientists would validate, but think of it as you have a baseline and there's a delta as a result of an intervention. So the delta, which I mentioned in my example, was less heat. Well, somebody, maybe it's the, Evergy is in Kansas City, maybe they care about less heat, or certain organizations might care about certain topics. It makes sense for them. And then the individual side. And we're committed to talking about, I don't know, Daniel, if you want to share anything, but on the individual side, 17% of people, they made from the University of Chicago. Okay, but there's a study out of the University of Chicago that said 17% of people over 100,000 in income are willing to actually pay at least $75 to $100 a month just for climate action. That is a great representation of what I just showed in that graph. They understand the benefits, and so what we're doing is we want to sell them these local eco credits, and we want to use that to fund projects like yours that are delivering on outcomes. So instead of nonprofits competing against each other to deliver on these federal grants, if you plant a tree and I plant a tree, the outcome would be the same because we're being verified by our protocol of results. So the results is the most important thing, and then who does that is less important because we're focused on the outcomes. And so with the individuals in the climate action marketplace, what we're focused on is, calculating people's carbon footprint, showing them the opportunity to offset, and as much as possible, creating a local Kansas City climate fund, which invests in these projects where we live, work, and play. So that's the real big thing, is a local climate action marketplace. And let's see, that's the link. And I can send that to anybody who wants it. By the way, we did pass around a sign-up sheet. I don't know if anybody didn't get it. Okay, so maybe Zach will help out with that, but you can opt out. But what we're gonna do is offer you the carbon footprint for free, just to look at your carbon footprint. Just because we think it's helpful knowledge to have, and Daniel is leading that effort. So we have the link to the standard. We're in the well, before we do, why don't I just let the group integrate what I said, and if anybody has any questions or feedback, I've got briefs in the front where you can pick it up and get like a little 2-pager of what it is. And my idea is let's break it and make it better and find out, okay, what are we missing? But imagine everything is governed by the protocols. So let's say that I care about health, or I care about literacy, or food desert, or carbon sequestration. You could stack those protocols all in one project, which is what I think you were saying is holistic approach, not just kind of tunnel vision. And in theory, that would be worth more to somebody. But at the end of the day, the marketplace will tell us a lot. We'll learn a lot in this exchange. So
Brian, let's get
Daniel a minute to talk about the follow-up and then whatever.
Okay.
I'll just share for just a minute. So I have I know this is very lofty graduate level, I guess. I'll give two concrete examples. So when I was interviewing those 300 people, I was just trying to find out, I'm an engineer, how do I help out? I wanted to learn, right? And one of the things that I discovered, I'll give you a concrete example. How many people have heard of Project Drawdown? Okay. How many people have heard of refrigerants? Okay, great. So refrigerants can be 7,000 times worse than carbon dioxide, right? So I learned something in Indiana. On the one hand, there was this local university that committed in 2012 to reduce their carbon emissions, which is amazing. Where I went to college, they still haven't even done that. Then they spent $1.5 million on sustainability to reduce carbon. They have rain barrels and gardens, but 10 years later, their carbon emissions have gone up 30%. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I learned was in Indiana, we have 700 grocery stores, and every year they leak 25% of their refrigerants. And the EPA has a free program called Green Chill. And all they have to do is keep track of the refrigerants and when they refill them, and just keeping track of it reduces leakage from 25 to 15%. That's all they have to do. Out of 700 grocery stores in Indiana, guess how many were participating when I was first joined the scene?
Zero?
One.
Oh.
So you've got this university who cares about outcomes, right? They've got $1.5 million to spend, but they hired a sustainability director who created a 60-page plan. And when they left, their replacement created a new plan. That's what I meant by succession plan. So they have $1.5 million. What they could have done is said, hey, innovation economy. If you sign up, if you can get some grocery stores to sign up for the EPA Green Chill program, we will pay you $1.5 million if you can verify that those grocery stores have in fact signed up. You follow me? So this is what Brian's talking about. You've got the demand, people with money, they're willing to pay. People with the supply, they can deliver low cost greenhouse gas reductions. But the people at this university had no idea that the grocery stores existed. And this is how I backed into the carbon market. I thought, wait a minute, you can abstract out this idea of a verified outcome and you can pay for it, right? And that's when I discovered this whole marketplace 3 years ago. So that's one quick example. The second thing I want to mention is forget climate for a change. How many people here have a dog? Okay, so let's say you've got $500 a year at Christmas, you and your husband or wife want to donate to some charity. So you give to like a local animal shelter and they rescue dogs from euthanasia. And after a while, after a couple of years of giving your money, you say, wait a minute, how many dogs have you rescued? And they're like, 3,000 dogs. You're like, okay, cool, nice. And then a year later, you're like, wait a minute, how effective are you? How much money are you spending? And well, we spend $100,000 to rescue 5,000 dogs. So that's whatever, $200 a dog or whatever. And you're like, okay, interesting. But this other organization can rescue a dog for 150. So forget the organization, forget how they do it. Focus on the outcomes. I want to rescue a dog. I want to do it for as cost effective as possible. You know what I'm saying? You can apply this to literacy, getting plastic out of the ocean, rescuing dogs, and greenhouse gases. So what we're talking about here is something that over the past 2 years, I've helped 800 people measure their carbon footprint over the phone, including my friend Jim Poyser. He was one of our first members. Jim Poyser is amazing. And I help them measure their carbon footprint over the phone. And then I say, okay, Mrs. Smith, every year you produce 40 tons of carbon trash. And I call it carbon trash. I say, Mrs. Smith, you pay to clean up your physical trash, $50 a month. Yep, okay. You pay to clean up your sewage, $40 a month for your water bill. Yep, okay. Did you know that 200 people in Indiana, like Jim Poyser and my wife and I, are paying to clean up their carbon trash? No, I didn't. How does that work? Then I explain how carbon markets work. And I say, when you pay $50 a month or whatever, we will invest that into projects like planting trees in Alaska, or capturing landfill methane, or feeding cows garlic to reduce burping up. And so after 2 years, I got 200 people to pay voluntarily, right? It's a carbon price. So Citizens Climate Lobby, who's familiar with CCL? Okay, they're advocating for a climate price that's transformative from the top down. What we're trying to do is advocate for a carbon price from the bottom up that's voluntary. And we know, because of the University of Chicago, that a lot of people are willing to pay. And the more people who pay to clean up their carbon trash voluntarily, we can create norms, and change the norms and change the culture. So I got connected up with Brian in Kansas City. He goes, what if we use this model to fund Kansas City outcomes, and not just carbon, but heat islands and everything else? So I feel like heaven brought us together, honestly. I felt so lonely until I met this friend. So if you want to measure your carbon footprint, what we're doing, we just launched this week, this program called Carbon Positive Kansas City. And we're trying to get 50 households to say, yes, I'm gonna clean up my carbon. And eventually that money will fund projects in the Midwest. So I'll stop there. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so we're pretty much at the end, but let's use as much time we have for popcorn style. What's bubbling up? Is anything bubbling up? Anybody have to talk? Okay, you were first, Sandy, and then.
So who are the recipients and and then B, how can my nonprofit become one? You know, I seriously, so I can see all this in technology and measurable outcomes.
Yeah.
But some of the social services or other soft services, how can that work?
So anybody, the way we've described it is project developers. The way we've set this up is, and it's all written in this plan, and we can, jam on it later, but anybody could be a project developer and you submit a project to a governing body that is, and basically you have to come up with what is the outcome you want to measure. So that could be a single indicator. Well, how are you going to measure it? At what frequency? So there's some documentation to make it real, and that outcome is really, there's a baseline and then there's the intervention and what you forecast it to be. And then we're measuring that through the period of time of the project. So you could absolutely apply, and that's what makes it a marketplace. It makes it anybody who wants to can apply for that. But and then as long as it meets the verification of the scientists, right now we're looking for 7 to 15 people that have that type of technical expertise that could validate, okay, what your conjecture is versus the actuals of what the protocol. Usually you might find it's not just any data point, it might be a protocol that's out there. So there's thousands of protocols. Oh my God, we didn't want to create another protocol. Just choose the heat index. If that's what you want to do is heat index, use that and judge yourself. You can choose essentially what protocol you want to be judged by. And over time, we'll get more sophisticated with vintages and making sure that they're, if you're doing heat and you choose the heat index and you're doing heat and you choose we'll work that out over time to create consistency. But that's my best answer at the moment. We had a couple questions here and then back to you.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. So first of all, is this basically the same as like federal grants, except for instead of funded by taxpayer dollars, it's just being funded like through the free market? Just to clarify, it's like a Netflix subscription service, kind of.
I wouldn't necessarily describe it that way, but I would say it is a donation, probably on all accounts at the moment, and from the individual, the corporation, but we're just, I think what makes it different is, every government funding portal or RFP has a particular focus. We're just saying, okay, define geographic area. We're focused on this particular geographic. We're saying, what is the outcome that you want to create? And we're finding people who will pay for that, using that. Who cares about that outcome? So in a way, you could call it structured philanthropy, but also in a way, it's a marketplace because people are buying right now carbon assets and not selling them. So in order for all these companies to meet the goals that they want, they need the results. So I don't know that I think it's creating more, I'd say, structure and more precision in the nonprofit outcomes that they're already working on. I think it adds some layers to that, but I don't know if I answered your questions.
Yeah, so like, I guess to clarify that more, it's more of just like a different way to sort of market philanthropy to people. So they're focusing on like, okay, I can actually measure what this outcome is instead of relying on, we're saying we're going to do this, but we don't quite know what's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, and then also, how would you set up this system in other countries? Because I know you were saying you did some work with the UN, so of course you're familiar with all the international development projects that need to happen, that like, how can we set this up and say like Africa and get people engaged there?
I would say if you're a representative of another city or another country and you want to do it, just email me. My email's right there. It's open source, so we'll literally give you what we got. And it will need to, over time, become more and more precise to your own geographic area, but I could totally, I mean, that's the idea, is that it exponentially, we're trying to mature it in one location and work out more kinks, but if somebody wants to try it in their city and then, there is political risk, so maybe one city gets passed, that, another one doesn't, or another country might get passed versus the United States. So I'm all for doing that, and we can learn together. You had a question in the back.
I can talk to you about it.
Okay. Did you have one?
You answered my question, but I just wanted to say, I think this could be incredibly effective in the Midwest has historically seen underfunded sustainability projects, but the coast gets so much love. So I'm excited you're starting here. And I help other cities climate action plan, and I think this could be a really effective way to integrate these strategies into climate action plans to have a surefire way to get these strategies funded. So thank you
Awesome.
for all
I love that. And also like what I'm trying to figure out is they have to continue to write those plans or inventories. So if you have a scientifically verified data stream that's saying that maybe that'll make it easier for the ongoing work, and then we focus more on action.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to connect them on that. Are you sure you want to wait or?
Yeah.
Okay, in the back, Bob.
I just want to say I love you because it's really like.
Awesome. Well, I imagine there's a project with Elevate, we just had to brainstorm. We'll jam in the city.
I just wanted to ask, like, this, like businessy perspective, right? So is there, like, when you were saying institutions have money that they want to spend on reductions, right? That's happening all the time. Is this going to be like a quantifiable reduction that someone can claim, like, instead of like, we bought these RECs, we claim that reduction,
What?
like renewable energy credits, right? Like that's how lots of companies are just handling it right now because they can't do feasibly or whatever. So is there a piece of this that translates into something claimable, like a return in the outcomes that like shareholders are expecting from that, or students at the university or whatever are expecting from the investment that they're making in the reduction? Like,
Yeah.
the actual
No,
outcomes are good, but
I have a
like,
whole section on, okay, what is if you were like a valuation perspective, what is the valuation of this? Well, first it's the cost to implement it, right? But other things might be, okay, well, what's all these other credits and how do they relate? I think the most important thing would be, there will be some that it's completely obvious that because of the heat island, we're reducing hospitalizations and therefore we're reducing expenses that this hospital has. We can actually track that and go backwards, right? But there will be some that are just completely for the good of the heart.
for sure, I get
And
that too.
so, I
You
think
know,
we're gonna
I'm
learn.
figuring out, like, how it's connected, or like if there's a measuring piece. that
It's all
can-
data and all
Right,
measurement.
right.
So it's the backbone of this whole thing is based off of data.
It just seems like the next logical step, right? If a business can pay, like say, a big grocery store can help smaller grocery stores, like do that, or the university or whatever, then they can claim that reduction.
Yeah,
Exactly. And then like, how do the reductions work in time? Because the projects, you're investing in future projects, but then the reduction, whatever, like all that math.
Yeah.
I love to touch.
Yeah.
Well, as we
Gotta
said
get
at
that
the outset,
document.
it's important that you do continue. talking.
Right.
Right.
It's
Yeah, we
important
need to
that-
look at it.
Yes.
Right.
It's all transparent and it's all verifiable. But we're redefining the tool that do that because we think the current tool are inadequate.
They're gonna make the existing tools much more useful,
Yeah.
but you have to be able to plug into thing that's already here, you know, that everybody's already using.
I thought I saw, okay, yeah,
Well, will you put the QR code back up there? That takes us to the document, is that correct?
no, it takes you to, I have a,
The Google, you said it's a Google Doc.
yeah, there is a Google Doc, I can send it.
Can you, I was just gonna say, like, in the documents app, yeah, that'd be great.
And I have a brief up here too.
Okay.
So
Yeah, there's.
I'll put it in
Yeah.
the chat.
I also just had a comment though too, like if you could take like the top 10 drawdown actions and like the top 10 climate action plan actions that you see out of local governments and measure those out so that it's super accessible.
Yeah.
You know, that would be awesome. So the refrigerant one, but the educating women and girls action item or drawdown, like that is a climate action. How do we fund that through a project like this? Like, I love this. I think it's really accessible.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Well, thank you all.